Hey, good morning. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I feel like I haven't talked to you guys in a long time, but hope you guys had a good Memorial Day weekend, and hopefully you're doing well at home with your family. Sounds like New York, Long Island's opening up a little bit, so hopefully we'll be less restricted and you'll be able to kind of get out of your house more and get back to your normal way of life. Real quick, what I'd like you guys to do is I'd like you to turn back to Unit 10. It's right before the unit we just finished, Unit 11, Geometry. And unfortunately, these books are not numbered, so what I'm going to do is give you a second to locate this page in your workbook. I know we just finished our workbook, but we did skip Unit 10. So let me give you guys a second to locate that. Pause me if you need to. Today we're going to talk about three words. We're going to talk about integers, we're going to talk about opposites, and we're going to talk about absolute value. And basically, I'm going to use this number line to teach you all three. So let's start with an integer. Every single number you see up here is an integer. An integer is any positive or negative whole number. So you won't see any decimals, no fractions. You will see a whole number with either a negative in front of it or a positive. What's the difference? Well, like a thermometer, if we are at 0 and we get warmer, we go to the right. Now, we're used to using this side of the number line. Pretty much our entire life has been in the positive range. Whether we're talking about earning money, we take in a positive amount. Test grades are always positive. You've never received a negative. But there are negative integers that we deal with as we get older, and this is where we will start. Now, negative really just means below 0. So the further you go negative, the bigger the number looks like negative 10, it actually is smaller. So the further you go to the left, the less it is. And we've talked about the word left a lot this year. So one of the things I want you to remember is the further you move to the left, the less the number is. So if I pick two numbers on this number line, let's say negative 9 and positive 1, and I say which one is greater, it's my right finger. If I say negative 7 and negative 2, which one's greater than? My right finger. If I say negative 6 and negative 5, which one's greater than? My right finger. And it even in positives, 2 and 7, obviously 7 is bigger. So I want you to start thinking of integers as negative and positive whole numbers. Now, let's talk about opposites. Now, opposite of big is small. Opposite of left is right. Well, the opposite of a negative number is a positive, and the opposite of a positive is a negative. So if I said, hey, what's the opposite of negative 4? Positive 4. What's the opposite of 9? Negative 9. So opposites, usually my students are very good at, but the only thing they do have a little trouble with and they get it confused with is something called absolute value. Now, absolute value, you may have seen these throughout my classroom this year. You might see a number inside, looks like a jail cell. You got two bars, one on the left, one on the right. Now, that's not 171. Those lines mean something called absolute value. And really all that means is you find the number inside, you find it, which is right here. And absolute value just wants to know the distance from 0, how far away from 0. So in this case here, 7 is 7 away from 0. Now that has nothing to do with the word opposite. That's strictly absolute value. Matter of fact, if I said something like this, negative 3, what is the absolute value of negative 3? Well, you would look at negative 3, you'd say how far, what is the distance from 0? 1, 2, 3. And that's how you do it. One of the things I used to always say with my students when I'm in class is absolute value is kind of like a prison. And any number that goes into prison, the only way it can come out of prison is if it's a positive. So you'll notice, unlike opposites, that absolute value will always be the positive version of that number, where opposites, the opposite of 5, could be negative 5. It doesn't always have to be a positive. So let's try a few practice problems and see how you do. All right, so let's go down to number 1. It says, what is the opposite and the absolute value of each integer? So let's start with opposite. The opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. The absolute value of 5, we go up, we say, how far away is 5 from 0? 5 away. So the absolute value and the opposite are two very different things. Let's try number 2. What is the opposite of negative 13? The opposite is positive 13. What is the absolute value of negative 13? How far away from 0? Again, if it's in jail, it can only come out of jail if it's positive, and so on and so forth. So why don't you guys give 3, 4, and 5 a shot? Should be pretty easy. Pause this video and unpause when you've got them. Go for it. And there are your answers 2, 3, 4, and 5. So hopefully you found some pretty good answers on those. Let's head down to 6, 7, and 8. Again, pause this video if you need to just check out those notes. These are, I think, the easiest part of today's lesson. You're just finding the opposite but graphing it. So if it says draw the opposite of negative 4, that's negative 4. The opposite is positive 4. That's all that is. Draw the opposite of 6. The opposite of 6 is negative 6. So you want to make sure your arrows are pointing in the right direction, but I think that's pretty easy to do. It says draw the opposite of negative 2 and 1/4. So negative 2 and 1/4 would be around here, and the opposite would go, make sure my arrow is pointing to the opposite, a little bit more than 2. All right, so let's head to the next page. Now we can compare integers, opposites, and absolute value. The absolute value of negative 22, how far away from 0, is 22. The absolute value of negative 12, how far from 0, is 12. Remember, distance can only be positive. And if you like my whole jail idea, it can only come out of jail if it becomes positive. And obviously 22 is greater than 12. Number 2. And again, use that pause button a lot. The absolute value, how far away, is 45. Absolute value of negative 46 is 46. Remember, again, absolute value is always going to be the distance from 0. Distance is always positive. You cannot run negative 4 miles. And 45 is less than 46. So you can compare integers using absolute value. You can order them. Let's look at number 7. So it says here, put the values from greatest to least. So the absolute value of negative 6, how far from 0? 6. The absolute value of negative 4, how far from 0? 4. The absolute value of 11, how far is 11 from 0? 11. And the absolute value of 0, well, that's 0. And if we put those in order, let's put them in order from greatest to least. We have absolute value of 11, comma. We have the absolute value of negative 6. I know that looks a little weird, seeing a negative being one of the greatest, but the absolute value is the distance from 0. And the smallest is the absolute value of 0. So we can actually compare absolutes. We can order absolutes. And it's fairly easy to do. You just got to remember that absolute value will always be that positive version because distance is always positive. Okay, I've got one more question I want to do with you, and then I'll give you guys your homework assignment for today. It says, please use, for number 15, please use rational numbers on the number line. We talked about rational numbers the first lesson of the year way back in September. And we just said a rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction, a repeating decimal, or a terminating decimal. But listen, who cares about that right now? Can we put these on a number line? That's all we have to figure out. So first and foremost, it says the absolute value of 4. The distance from 4 from 0 is 4 away. So let's find 4. Put a dot, put a point, and let's label it. This is the absolute value of 4. Now, negative 3.5. That would be negative 3 and another half, and I'll label it negative 3.5. Absolute value of negative 6. Well, the distance from 0, remember, it's got to be a positive. So I'm going to go ahead and put that there and label the absolute value of negative 6. This one always drives people crazy. What's the absolute value of 4 minus 2? Well, what is 4 minus 2? 4 minus 2 is 2. And the absolute value of 2, how far from 0? 2. And you always want to write down your exact problem so you have it. And where is there a 1/2? Right there. And that's a rational number. We'll talk more about that as we go. So here's what I want. I want it to be an easy Tuesday for you. We've already done about 11.5 minutes for our lesson today. So I'm going to give you guys the next page as your homework. Feel free to go back to the lesson if you want to repeat anything that I said. You have 11 questions to work on the top. I've gotten rid of 12. And 13 is a blast from the past, and I've included the formula that I'm hoping you'll be able to remember how to use. So you have 12 problems for you for today. Post them to Google Classroom. You'll be done math right away. And I miss you guys. I will see you tomorrow. Have a good day.